All right, welcome folks. We are about to get started. So first, welcome to our 15th session between EdTechTeacher and the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So as you can tell, we've been doing this for a while. For those of you that have joined us before, welcome back. For those of you that are new, just a really quick introduction, then we will dive right into our workshop. So we've been running these sessions since last spring. We did a series of them last spring and summer, a few different topics, but then we had some pretty good feedback from participants, so we decided to ramp it up throughout this school year. A lot of it's been about pedagogical approaches and then leveraging technology with it. Today's session is about designing station rotations and leveraging Google Workspace tools, as well as some other educational technologies. So like we always do, we share out all of the resources. It's all Creative Commons, so feel free to use this, share this with any of your colleagues. If you just joined us, I am going to put the link to this in the chat right there. So if you want to jump right in, save the slides, go for it. The other thing we've been doing throughout the, especially through the fall and winter, is we know that everyone's schedule is kind of crazy. Things are clearly not like a normal schedule, to say the least. So we know that it's tough to get to these live and to participate in the whole thing. So we've been putting all of these video archives on our YouTube channel. So even if today you can only pop in and out for a little bit, check out our EdTechTeacher YouTube channel. We have all of the videos of our past sessions as well as this one we will have posted there as well. My name is Tom Driscoll. I'm an instructor for EdTechTeacher. I've been a full-time instructor for the past year with them. I've been doing some work with them for the past 5 years or so. Before that, I was a digital learning director for a regional school district in Rhode Island. So if you're familiar with Rhode Island, it was the Bristol Warren Regional School District. Before that, I was a high school social studies teacher for 8 years in 2 different public school districts in Connecticut. So that is my background. I see a couple other folks did just jump in, so I'm going to paste the session slides in one more time, and then we will get started. So we have over 30 folks here live in the call. So what I'd like us to do, just to get a quick read of the room, if you could please introduce yourself in the chat, just put in, your name, what your grade level is or subject area focus. And then if you'd like to also share what school district or organization you're part of, just take a minute or so to add that to the chat. All right, thank you guys. So I'm going to keep rolling, but feel free to add in your roles. I see a lot of folks already are instructional coaches. So as I mentioned at the beginning, if any of these resources you would like to share with your staff, if you're doing your own internal professional development, feel free to use this. And then also just reach out. I mean, we are very accessible, myself, Avra. Anytime you want to reach out and collaborate with us, or if you want us to work with some folks at your school, feel free to do so. All right, as far as the teachers, it looks like we have a pretty good span of elementary up until secondary. So hopefully I have a little bit of everything for you guys. Okay, so to jump right in, so what is in this workshop? So this is a little bit more of a pedagogical workshop as opposed to like a tech tool specific one. So I'll talk a little bit about how I laid this out, but again, feel free if you're going to use this with your school, to modify this as you wish, if you want to focus more on the tech side or just on the pedagogical side. And of course, I couldn't add everything in here, but what I tried to do is use this slide deck almost as like a resource document, to take a package for you guys to use with your use for your class or with teachers you're working with. All right, so as far as the content of the workshop, we're going to start out by taking a closer look at station rotations as an approach, like as a teaching philosophy or a strategy. Because I feel like a lot of times when we talk about like ed tech for station rotations, we just jump right in without going over what is a good station rotation, why would you design it the way that you do, and some resources regarding what is good station rotation design. So that's going to be the first half of our workshop here. So parts 1 and 2 of the agenda are, what are station rotations? How do you design them effectively? And I pull from some research from the Learning Accelerator. If you aren't familiar with that group, I did put a few links in the slides to some of this research. They have research on a ton of different blended learning strategies. So highly recommend that group as well. They've actually done some work with us at EdTechTeacher, just some internal sharing of ideas. So great group to work with. Then we're going to get into some more of the advanced uses of it and the technology in it. So It's such a broad topic. I'm not going to go into specific tutorials, but I did link in a lot of tutorials that are there. And the good part about having we're up to 38 participants now is use that chat to share out ideas. So I tried to put different technology buckets, for instance, in the agenda. If you have some other go-tos for each of these topics, share those in the chat. And also maybe an example if you have one. So a sample project or a lesson plan, that would be really helpful for everybody. And what I can also do is I can curate all of that at the end. And then I believe we have everyone's registration and we could actually share that out to you guys as well as the link. So feel free to share, don't be shy. Okay, so let's dive right into it. So station rotation explained. All of this information, or most of it, the research comes from, as I mentioned, the Learning Accelerator. If you click on the link at the bottom there's a few different studies that I'm pulling from here, but they have a few different what's called a problem of practice series. So they have these for a lot of different topics. So again, highly recommend this resource. What I'll do is I'll just put a main link to their problem of practice resources. I'll throw those into the chat. Actually, one of our former instructors, Beth Holland, I'm sure some of you guys have worked with her in the past. If you've worked with EdTechTeacher at all, she's actually at the Learning Accelerator now. She's one of their lead researchers, I believe. So again, very reputable organization. And if you're wondering where some of this research comes from, that's where it is getting pulled from. All right. So what is the challenge? So we all know that our students have a wide spectrum of abilities, of talents, of interests, right? So Digital Promise has actually done a lot of research lately on learner variability. If you've been in any of my sessions before, you probably heard me reference them. And what's different about learner variability and the idea of like learning styles is, and I was taught this even in my like undergrad, like Gardner's theories of different intelligences and learning styles. It's actually not founded in a lot of research, believe it or not. So the idea of like, oh, I'm a visual learner, it's not that simple, and nothing is fixed. So the idea of learner variability means that yes, we have all these differences, but we can grow all of those different capacities. We're not kind of stuck in one lane, for instance, but that's a conversation for another day. The whole point here is that we have all of this variability in our class, and we know that whole group instruction is really hard to do. So one of the ways to differentiate instruction is through a station rotation model. So I see a lot of you guys are from an elementary setting or elementary coaches. In all of my experience, elementary teachers tend to have more experience with the station rotation model. Not to say that the secondary doesn't, but I remember when I was teaching in my social studies classes, I started to experiment with like the flipped classroom and blended learning rotations, and it was relatively new to me. I wasn't really used to that. So again, your experience level might depend a little bit more on your grade level, but it can be applied across the board, K to 12, even in higher ed, they use some type of rotational models. So the thing about it though, is that to do it well is you have to be willing to be a little bit more flexible, and you have to be able to give up a little bit of that control over the classroom. And I remember I had a principal one year, and he actually came in and he said that he likes to see in a classroom, if he can't determine where the front of the room is, he said that's usually a good sign. And that's because it's a little bit more flexible, maybe because moving around. Now, of course, the elephant in the room here is COVID, right? And so you may be very restricted right now in how you can move different furniture and how kids can move through the classroom. So a lot of the station rotation is going to be virtual for now, even if kids are in class. Last year in Bristol Warren, a lot of the station rotation work we did, the kids weren't actually moving anywhere, but they were transitioning, or the stations were actually the activities that they were moving through. So in the here and now, as we go through today with station rotation, think of it more of like that virtual moving through activities, not necessarily through space, but long-term, eventually we're going to get to a point where we can be a little bit more flexible with space as well. All right, so a couple things. The reasons why the research says station rotations work is that, first of all, it helps us address that learner variability, right? So when you have smaller groups, you can tailor it more to what students need. The second thing is it tends to give kids more ownership and choice, right? So if one of your focus areas as a teacher is to give students more choice and autonomy, you can do it, but in a more structured way, right? And I did something where, I don't know if you guys have heard of the idea of like 20% time or Genius Hour. I was all in on that because it was all about autonomy and ownership. But frankly, some of my students really struggled with those really wide open-ended projects where it was kind of completely self-paced because they needed a little bit more structure of it. So I like station rotations primarily because it gives them ownership, but there's still some guardrails, right? There's still some structure to the class for students that maybe need some more of that as they go through, especially for younger kids. All right, so how to design them, right? So there's three main areas to focus on when you're getting into do, or if you're trying to improve or enhance your station rotations. The first one is the idea of culture in the classroom. So are the kids able to be successful in that more open environment? Second is, how do you think about using space? And in this case is also thinking about your digital space. Let's focus on that in the second half of our session, but thinking about how do you organize how their workflows. And then the third one, which is similar, is the idea of routines. What routines do you have in place? Super, super important for elementary kids. For any of you who are elementary teachers, you know this, like having clear protocols in place and routines for the rotations. How do you start it up? What are some ways that you move through the space? What are some things that you submit at the end of your station? All of those are very important things to consider. All right, so the first part, let's talk about culture for a second. So when you think about that, a lot of it is, one, they have clear expectations of what is and isn't acceptable in your station rotation model. So you want to give them that voice and choice, right? But you still want them to know what are they expected to do during the station, what are they expected to submit, and then eventually giving them a little bit more control over that, but starting with a very clear and structured concept. Here's the easiest takeaway here for culture is, and this worked a lot for myself and some teachers I was working with in Bristol Warren. For every station at all possible, the expectation is that they are demonstrating their understanding in some way, that they are some type of visible thinking routines involved. That's just part of the culture. Like they know that if they're in a station, they have to provide some evidence of what they did, right? So you don't have to do that, but that's one strategy that really helps as far as getting that routine in place. So a couple things to think about, right? And again, this, you might be thinking, hey, where's the tech stuff? Trust me, we're going to get there. But all of these things kind of lay the foundation for it. So how do your students learn best, right? And that should be part of your design, right? So you have a good read of your students, especially at this point of the year. Do you think stations make sense? And if so, how would you design them to help meet their needs? Are they given choices about where they go and how they learn? You may set it up where they may choose which station they're going to. Right. So the traditional model is everybody goes through each station, but maybe you have stations set up where they can choose what modality they learn in or what topic they do. So you can actually start to build in a lot more choice than more the traditional rotational model. And then do they have any buy-in and ownership of it? Maybe we propose to them like, hey, what would be a good station to learn this content? Or what would be a good station for collaboration or student creation? So thinking through how you can involve them in the process. And let's face it, as we get later on in the year, the more we can try to tap into their engagement and motivation through ownership in the process, that's really important. All right, so the second concept is the idea of space. Now, again, your options may be very limited right now, given the state of the world, frankly, but still some things to think about is how do you design your space? And one teacher that, this was way back when the flipped learning concept was first coming out, I was at a conference out in Pittsburgh, and the teacher explained it the way that they set up their room was, I think they pointed to like some Aboriginal traditions or something like that. But the whole idea of like you have your cave, you have your campfire, and you have your watering hole. And what they mean by that is the cave is like where you kind of learn or work in silence, isolated, like on your own. The watering hole is when everybody goes and collaborates, and the campfire is kind of like when the elders explaining and lecturing or something like that. So even something as simple as that is like you have a space where it's more for direct instruction, you have a space that's more for independent work, you have a space for collaboration, thinking how you might want to set that up. You may have it based on technology. So if you have technology use in one area and then not in another. So something that's happening a lot is most of our stations have had some type of technology just because we've had to. It's been the only way to really manage the current COVID situation that we have. But eventually, I actually suggest pulling that back, right? So having at least 1 or 2 stations where they don't have a Chromebook open, they don't have an iPad open, because one, I think it's healthy for them to have that time not on it, but also it helps create more of a collaborative nature in your class. So if you have one station where you're just talking with the students or they're talking to each other, that's a really good balance to have. I've been in some schools where they'll do a station rotation, and I'll observe a whole hour class, and I didn't hear one kid talk. And to me, I don't think it's a bad lesson, but it could be better, right? If you're going through a whole school day and all you're doing is you're on a Chromebook, you never actually talk to another human during school, that's not ideal, right? So you need to build in some of that time and space for kids to talk when possible. All right, so this is kind of like the traditional Christensen Institute blended learning 101 approach to it. This is where a lot of teachers start, but you don't have to end here, right? So the first one is the idea of having one group for small group direct instruction where the teacher's leading it. That's kind of like this part here. You have one independent workstation. Usually that's some type of online practice or skill work. And then you have a collaboration station, right, where kids are actively working together. Now, again, all of these can have some technology. Maybe you don't have any technology, but it's just a way that you can set this up. So just for instance, say you have a math class. Maybe you have the math teachers doing some direct instruction there with one small group really diving into it. They have a collaborative activity where maybe they have manipulatives and they're working with each other. And then maybe they go on something like IXL or Prodigy or something like that for your online instruction. So that's a simple way to think about it. Think about it for writing. Actually, I've seen a lot of teachers that do like writing workshop style instruction where they'll actually model something or they'll go through student work in that teacher station. Maybe they'll work on crafting something here, and then their online could be typing out their paper, or maybe something like No Red Ink or one of those online models to work on ELA. I believe like IXL and those have some adaptive ELA lessons as well. So that's kind of like the traditional way you would set up your space or through those rotations. All right, a couple things to consider with space. First thing, what's the goal of creating them? Because there could be a few different reasons why you're doing rotations. Is it to try to increase the engagement? Is it to try to have more targeted instruction? Is it to try to get kids to work together more? Depending on what your goal is, it might look a little bit different from class to class. Really thinking through what are they actually doing at each station and what are they submitting to you for student work. Now, you don't have to do it for every single station, but that should be a norm, is that they're doing something and they're submitting something. And then where do you want to put that small group? Primarily so that you can, I hate to say this, but so you can see them, right? So if you're putting a small group in a spot where it's really hard for you to do a quick check-in or interact, that's probably not a recipe for success. So trying to set it up in a way that you could bump into that or drop into that small group if needed, even if you have your live group. Then think about your devices, right? So how many do you need? Where are they? How do you charge them? Now, most districts at this point are one-to-one, but if you are in a school that has like shared carts or limited device access, this is something you have to consider. Even if you are one-to-one, as I mentioned, like, are the kids walking around the class with the Chromebooks the whole time, or are they staying seated? If they're seated the whole time going through virtual stations, like which ones would they need a Chromebook for? So a lot of things to think through. All right, so furniture. I'm not going to talk about furniture too much, but if you are blessed with the opportunity to get new furniture, all of the ones that I have seen have been very flexible and modular. The more modular and flexible you can have, the better. But also in the future, if they say things change pedagogically or technologically, you can still adapt with that furniture. You're not locked into one specific thing. I'll give you one example. So schools that are getting screens, right? So if you're getting an interactive TV or a screen or whatever, the immediate goal is to like mount that sucker somewhere, like put the TV up on the wall, get it, because I want more space in my classroom. And I had this conversation with a lot of elementary school teachers over the years because it can be kind of bulky if you're rolling it in and all that. But the problem is once you mount that thing to the board, it's going to be like moving, let's just say it's hard to change that. The process of getting something unmounted and moving it. So just the point here, that's just a quick example, but the more you can make it so that you can adapt throughout a lesson or even over time, that tends to be a better route. Okay. So last one, and then we'll get a little bit more into the specifics. So the routines, right? So we don't need to go into too much detail here, but thinking about the routines that they go through, like when they enter the room, when they're starting their station, when they're logging in. For younger kids, it might be a technological routine. So like, I want you to open your Chromebook, go to Clever. Once you're in Clever, access IXL, whatever that is. A lot of teachers like to use like laminated cards with things. I know for teachers that use Seesaw, that's a huge thing, having just visual aids for those stations. I like to use Seesaw because they actually have a lot of pre-made ones, but say you have like a kindergartner or a first grader hopping to a station, you want some nice clear visuals on what they're doing, how they're going to get there. So having those routines and then making them consistent across the school is very helpful. All right, so this next one, this is a little bit more of an advanced concept, and this is where having students do something in the station is so important. So whether it's doing a quick diagnostic assessment, whether it's doing a formative assessment, whether it's just sharing their thinking through a video or through Seesaw, that's really important. And the reason why is that when you get better at doing stations, you can think a little bit differently about how you design them and what the progressions are, right? So when you think about data, and particularly formative assessment data, what's going to be the most helpful to you, right? So think about that. Is it going to be like interest surveys? Could it be just performance data? Could it be information that you get about how kids work and interact together? Also, what does mastery look like, right? So, and this is one of my pet peeves with some of the station rotation work that I see. You might have a student, right, that's working with you that maybe they show that they've mastered a concept. Let's just say stick with math. Like they know this thing inside and out, but then they still go do an activity of something that they clearly already know how to do just because it's the next part of the rotation. So the next level of stations would be in that situation, that student wouldn't go to another station where they practice something that they already know how to do. Now, it sounds painfully obvious, but I know it's hard to do that. Like that's hard to make that type of differentiation on the fly, but I think it's still a good goal to have, because if you do station rotations and everyone's always doing the same thing, regardless of where they are, how differentiated is it really? It's really just kind of the same thing, but kids are doing it at different times. So using some of that instructional data, maybe you have different groupings, maybe you have a different direct instruction station, maybe the online activity they do is more based on their skill set. A lot of them have adaptive software anyway. So take something like Newsela, right? So if you have a Newsela subscription for your school, you go in and say you're reading a primary source document. When they do that station reading that primary source document, it would actually be leveled to their reading level, regardless of the topic, right? So those are just some ways that you can leverage some instructional technologies to help do some of that for you. All right, so real quick, because I know that you guys have a decent understanding of some of these, but just to think through this with, maybe it's with your staff or some of your colleagues, what's some of the data that I can get in my stations, right? So one of the best ones is some of that real-time data, right? And this could be just a quick scan of the room. Like you could do some visuals, right? You could do like a thumbs up, thumbs down, fist to five, emoji things. Also, you can do some quick entrance tickets, whether it's physical or digital. A lot of the adaptive software has real-time data where if you have them do an activity, you could pull up the dashboard and see exactly how everyone just did on that intro activity or as part of that station. A little bit more in depth, you might want to do some type of formative assessment. And again, that might be some more like a diagnostic that you do through something like Dreambox or iReady. It could be some project results. It could be exit tickets that you do through Google Forms or Google Sheets. So those are the most widely used during a station rotation. So just think about all the different ways you could do that. Later in the session, we're going to talk about some specific technologies that can help you do these things. Now, if you're thinking more of like long-term, you can think about some summative assessment information that can, like say you're doing it at the end of a unit test, maybe you design your stations differently in the next unit based on those summative assessments, right? So that's a little bit more of a long-term planning. If you're working with your PLC or your department, that's more of a long-range thing. You're not changing that on the fly. That might just be, hey, I'm going to do my stations differently next unit based on this information. It could also be some observational data. This is especially good if you're doing things that are a little bit harder to measure with, say, an adaptive software. Having some type of look for can be helpful, especially if it's more things like how well do they work with groups. We'll get a little bit more into the SEL in a second. All right, so the standardized test data. So the reason why I bring that up is because sometimes it actually is pretty helpful to have some of that benchmark data or like NWA testing. because when you take a look at that, that can help you design some of your groups, right? So for instance, my son and daughter just took one of those benchmarking tests in their elementary school. And I actually know their math teacher pretty well. And I'm pretty sure he's going to take some of that information to think about what his progressions are going to be and some of the different groupings that he makes for the next unit coming up. The last one is a little bit more about non-content focused data. So it might be more things like behaviors, social interactions. If you have like an SEL rubric or SEL look-fors, those are also types of data. So all of those things can be considered when you're designing your groups. So now that you have that information, think, and this is again a little bit more of an advanced approach to it, what are the groups that you're setting up? Like, so you have your stations. What types of groups did you design? Like, how did you make them? Why did you put them with who they're with? So think about that for a second. If you just randomly put them in, that's fine. But that next level is to think about different types of groups. Now, here's a quick graphic that you could use for this. So the first is, what is the reason why you're putting kids together in the first place? Maybe you're having a focused direct instruction lesson. Maybe you have a PBL task that you want them working together on. Maybe you want them conferencing and working with each other and providing each other feedback with some peer tutoring. Maybe they're doing presentations to each other. Or maybe you just want them to work together and work on some of those communication skills. So there's a lot of reasons why you'd want them to be in groups. What I don't want you to do is just like when I first started teaching, I would say, all right, time for group work. And if I really thought about I'm doing group work because I'm like, oh, group work's good, so let's do group work. Like I didn't really think through, why are they actually doing this task together? And if you can't come up with a really good reason, then maybe you don't even need to do groups. Like just kind of think through, why are they pairing up or why are they going into small groups? Now, what other groups you could make? So you could just make it based on performance data. Like, yeah, I'll have all the kids in the same grouping that are in the same level. You could have it more on purpose that you mix the groups up. Maybe you want them to collaborate across different performance levels. Maybe you just want kids to learn from each other, that kind of peer instruction model. You could do it based on interest. This is really good for projects. Or maybe you just strategically choose students, especially at this time of year, because you know who's going to work well together and who's not. So there's no one right answer to this, but just considerations as you design your groups. All right, so let's get more involved with the tech part of this. So that's our overview of station rotations, some of the research around it. Again, all this stuff is sourced at the bottom. This next part is, all right, well, that's all well and dandy, but maybe I'm in a hybrid model or I'm in a virtual instruction. Just for some context, my daughter's teacher today was teaching in hybrid still, right? So my daughter's home and 5 or 6 other students are home. She's like going on Google Meets, the teacher's in class. So I know there's a lot flying, a lot of challenges with this. So what are some ways that you could do more of a virtual or hybrid station rotation model? And this is where I'm going to provide a ton of resources for you guys. The first one here, there's actually a couple different templates. Actually, if you guys, anyone did just join, I'm going to put it one more time in the chat here, the slides for today, because I would like you guys to jump in. Looks like some of you guys are. Okay, so the first one here, this has actually been making the rounds. This is by instructional technology specialist that made a virtual station rotation template. Now, again, you don't need to necessarily use all of this, but there's a section for breakout rooms, a teacher-led station, online station, extension activities. I know a lot of teachers that I've been working with have used this as some inspiration for how they'd want to design theirs. Like you may not want this exact format or layout, but it could be something that you use to kind of think about how you'd want to use Google Slides to, I guess, manage your station rotation activities. For those of you that have used Moat before, Moat is that little extension up here. This is where you could even layer in audio points into your slides. So if you want to give kids instructions, you can pop it in there and you're good to go. If you use something like Seesaw, you could actually replicate things similar to this through Seesaw activities. But for our purposes here, we're going to use Google Slides. All right, a simpler template. This is one we've been sharing out for a while now. If you just wanted to create a simple template that you use for your stations that are maybe color coded, this is one that you could take a look at. So for instance, maybe you have a teacher-led station, you have that outlined here, an independent collaborative station, an offline station. It seems kind of ironic to have an offline Google Slide station, but again, this is just different ways that you can set up your templates, different ways to navigate it. You can have links to Google Forms if you want quick assessments. But this would be something that you would actually push out to students that they would have their own version of as they go through your rotation activities. The other thing you could do is think about how you'd want to use this to manage the progression. So if you're completely virtual, or if your kids can't move at all in your class, which is very possible, right? Then you could say, all right, I want group 1. You're going to go through this progression through the stations. Group 2, 3, 4, these are the progressions. So they may not actually be physically going anywhere or moving anywhere, but this is the progression they would go through your virtual station activities. All right, so a couple other resources. So Catlin Tucker, you're probably familiar with some of her work. She's presented at MassQ a couple times, I think. She actually created a quick guide that has some things to consider if you're designing virtual station rotation. So she's been doing station rotation for years. I believe one of her videos that showed you how to do it came out in like 2015, right? So she's been doing a lot of this for a long time. This is an example of what a virtual station rotation lesson plan might look like, how you might set it up. There's a quick link to it here. But again, just some considerations as far as how you might design a virtual station rotation. Okay, so the last one here is an article from Edutopia. Again, a very reputable organization. They have a ton of good content here. And this teacher just put together a quick guide for how to do station rotation virtually. So again, just another little takeout package for you guys to check out. All right, so now let's get into the nuts and bolts of the tech itself. And this is also where I want you guys to share some of your ideas and best practices and tech tools. So first thing is, if you're using Google Workspace, one of the most, I would say, versatile uses of this would be what's called a Hyperdoc. And this tool's been, this concept's been around for a while, but essentially it's taking a Google slide or a Google Doc. Typically it's one of those two, and you build out your stations or your playlists right within there. And that's where the students actually complete their work, right? So they actually go in and they access the content, they do the assessments, they do their collaborations, and it's all within one spot. If you want to take a look at like the full Hyperdocs presentation that I've put together, you could click there and I have a whole run through of it. And if you wanted to see what some examples would look like, I have some examples from pre-K to high school. Most of them are Google Docs and slides, but just so you can kind of see how you would set up a station rotation or playlist model right within some of those core documents. All right, so that's kind of like how you would manage the whole thing. The first thing that I would say to really lock in is your content, right? So thinking about what is some digital content that I can leverage as part of my rotations, right? So if I know I want one station where the kids are going to learn something online, it could be an article, it could be a video, it could be a simulation. Where are you pulling from? So this is kind of like my core toolkit. I know there's a ton of them that I didn't add, but these are the ones that I really like. If you have a Discovery Education account, there is so much information that you could pull in there for stations. If you're looking for more free content, a Crash Course, they first came out, I think it was just social studies courses, but now they have everything. They have all different humanities courses. They have science. Not sure if they have any math yet, but those are like free YouTube based courses. Brain Pop is freemium. Some of it's free, some of it's not. PhET simulations are always a hit with science teachers. And then iCivics, that is my favorite for social studies folks for any type of game or simulation. I did mention Newsela. There's a free version and a paid version. That's great for leveled articles. So again, say I'm doing a lesson on the Bill of Rights and I have an article in Newsela, I could have 5 different reading levels of that. So as kids go to the different stations, they would access that article at their reading level. There are other versions of that. I know the Tween Tribune by Smithsonian has a version of that. I also believe Common Lit, I think they have some type of leveling, but there are a lot of other ones out there if you're thinking more for ELA. So what I'd like you guys to do is thinking of content, right? If there are other content libraries, whether it's curriculum based from a company, or if it's a free tool online, add that to the chat. If it's like, hey, I really like, TED Ed Talks. If I want to use them with my kids, add that so folks can check that out. The second thing as far as digital content, right, is making your own. Think about making your own digital content, so whether it's an instructional video, a tutorial, something like that. So those are for folks that have done like the flipped classroom approach, or you just make a lot of instructional videos because we've had to over the past couple of years. I keep coming back to my kids' experience, but when the teacher was out recently, she made quick instructional videos for her students. And it's really simple stuff. It's just kind of going through making a screencast, but it's really powerful because say you're working independently or part of a station, you still have that teacher direct instruction archived through the video. I actually created a flipped learning instructional video session for this series. So if you want to check that out, the video of it's linked there. And also the slides for that session are linked in here too. So if you click that, it'll actually bring up, this was way back session 3 we did over the summer, but this is all about using Google tools to create instructional videos and video-based lessons. So again, if you want to check this out, that is there for you guys. I also saw that Tiffany mentioned PBS Learning Media. That is a fantastic source. I'm glad you brought that up. There's a lot of great work there. I think they actually partnered with Crash Course to make some digital citizenship lessons, but excellent source. I'm glad you brought that up. There's also another one that I didn't put in the slide deck, but this is more for science teachers. Oh, how am I forgetting the name of it? It'll come to me, but there's I think it was Harvard and MIT put together a collection of virtual science simulations that were free. Oh, here it is, Lab Exchange. So if you want to check this one out, this is also free. This is a little bit more for the science folks, but if you're looking for virtual simulations and things of that nature, check out Lab Exchange. You can see all the different groups that feed into this platform. All right, Mrs. Keene mentioned study jams from Scholastic. I haven't seen that one before. I'll have to check that one out. Excellent. Yeah, so check these out for some more content. All right, so content is key to have that really good digital content. The next thing is thinking through what are some other parts of your stations that you want to set up. And regardless of how you design it, you're going to need some type of formative assessment station. Some teachers have formative assessment as part of almost every station, just as like a way to make sure kids are actually doing it. But these are my go-to tools for formative assessment in a station rotation. The easiest one is Google Forms. People know how to use it. Kids know how to do them. So that's kind of like square one. If you're in like K-2, or if you're in a primary seesaw district, just use some of those built-in seesaw assessment tools, whether it's drawing, audio, both. Use some of those as part of your rotation. Padlet's been around forever. They did drop the paywall down on this a couple years ago, but it's still kind of a tried and true place for kids to add in their ideas. I actually know a lot of like art teachers like to use that for kids to add in like different parts of their projects or even their final projects. A couple other ones here. So Jamboard, that one really came out of nowhere last year, and a lot of teachers are using that for digital formative assessments as well. So maybe part of their station is to go in and annotate or add things to a Jamboard. You could even have a Jamboard where you set up where you already have a background set up for them and they annotate over the top of it. So that's a really versatile tool. If you haven't used that before for digital formative assessment, that's an option. Pear Deck is taken off as well. I didn't put the Nearpod link in there too, but Pear Deck and Nearpod, those are really helpful because they have those built-in checks for understanding that you add right into your Google Slides, right? So if you're doing like a self-paced Pear Deck assignment as part of a station rotation activity, I believe there's text responses, multiple choice. I think there's a draw option. I don't know if there's any audio. If there is audio, let me know, but that's a really popular tool for teachers, especially in Google districts. And then lastly, Flipgrid. That's a great one if you just want students to maybe explain their thinking at the end of a station, or if you want them to take a picture of something and talk about it. That's a nice, easy way to kind of bookend. The only trick here is the logistics of the audio creation. Like if you have like a whole station of kids all creating a Flipgrid at the same time in the same spot, any teacher that's been in that scenario knows that it can get a little bit tricky. There are some ways around that. So one thing that you could do, actually I'd have to change my camera angle here, but you can get these little foam, they're kind of like soundproofing foam, but it's actually really cheap. And you just get like an Amazon box. But if you have them put their iPad or Chromebook in like a box like that, believe it or not, it really does make it easy to record and you don't get a lot of that ambient sound. So just a couple tips. If you're looking for more tips on like audio and soundproofing, just shoot me an email. I can help you out with it. But Flipgrid is a really good formative assessment tool. If there's any other ones that you find that are really helpful as part of a station, again, add that to the chat. All right, so the next thing is if you wanted to really get into the weeds with the formative assessment data from the stations. So I did a session, it was last week, I believe, and it was on Google Sheets, right? So how can you take the information from, say, a Google form or just some observation data you take in class and really do a lot with that data to make some visuals, to monitor progress, do some conditional formatting. If that's something you're interested in and you didn't check out last week's session, I did put a link to it here. The video is linked into it, and the presentation itself is linked here. So if you guys want to take a look at ways to use formulas, filters, visualizations with your student data, this is kind of like an all-in-one one-stop shop for that. So that is the student data. Just checking the chat here. Oh, a couple other options came through. So Meg mentioned Generation Genius. There's some free, but they also have paid math and science. Vocabulary. I forgot to mention that. Is vocabulary completely free? I wasn't sure. I didn't know if it's paid or free or not, but I actually saw one on it wasn't parts of speech. What was it? It was I guess different elements of a narrative for different styles. They have some really good good stuff for ELA and for other subjects too. And then mystery science, that mystery science, that's a huge one for elementary folks. I forgot about him. So definitely another one to take a look at. Kelly said that Nearpod does have audio responses, which is great. I'm not sure if Pear Deck does. So Jen, so Pear Deck will allow teachers to insert audio clips, but kids can't yet. But I would assume that's coming. Primarily because Moat has been such a hit, and other companies were like, wait a minute, why can't we just add that into our existing tools? So keep an eye out for a lot more of that audio integration. Okay, so back to the slides here. The next part is gamified tools. So if you want to have a quick game as part of your station rotation, the only caveat here is you have to set it up so it's a self-paced game, because it's really hard logistically to launch a live game when kids are in all different stations, right? Just think about how to manage that. I mean, you could do it, but I would say regardless of the tool you use, set it up to be more of that self-paced mode. These are the big five, right? So these are my power five as far as gamified digital formative assessment tools. Everybody knows Kahoot. Kahoot was the first one to come out. There's Kahoot music in every school in the country. So we don't need to go into that one. The other alternatives though, so if you're getting sick of Kahoot, if your kids are getting sick of Kahoot, Quizlet Live, great option. A lot of people didn't even know Quizlet had a game option, but it's called Quizlet Live. You just go into any flashcard deck. Really fun variation of gamified quizzes. The app called Quizzes, some people consider it a knockoff of Kahoot, but a lot of teachers like it because, and kids like it primarily because it has a lot of like in-game power-ups and different types of gameplay that you can do. So I highly recommend Quizzes. One that's relatively new that a ton of teachers in Massachusetts have told me about, a lot of actually, particularly Barnstable. I was working with folks up in Barnstable a lot last year, and their teachers loved this. And that was a middle school group. But I know especially elementary and middle school, Blookit is really popular. If you haven't tried that out, check it out. I think the big draw for that one is that students actually have an account. They have like an avatar and they can accumulate like points and currency and like purchase digital items. It doesn't seem like much, but it is a pretty good hook for students. So if you add that as part of your station, that could be helpful. The most interesting one on here though, I think is actually called GimKit. If you guys haven't tried that one out before, it was actually created as a part of a high school student's project a couple of years ago, and it did so well. I guess he actually turned it into a real company. So if you haven't used it before, essentially it has different game modes for your questions. So I think he has one that's kind of like an Avengers style game. He has one that's kind of like Among Us, right? If you know any upper elementary, middle school student, you probably know about the Among Us game. So there's a lot of popular variations of gameplay that you can use with that. That one, I believe, though, is a paid tool that's not free last time I checked. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so I did put links to some tutorials. So I have a Quizlet tutorial there. I have a Kahoot tutorial, and I have a Quizzes tutorial. I don't have any for Blookit or GimKit, but I'm working on it. But if you want to check any of those out or share those with your colleagues, feel free to do so. All right, a couple more topics, and then we're going to wrap things up. So collaboration. You may want kids working together within your station. The easiest way is actually with Google Docs, right? And they've come out with some new features recently. So if you haven't checked, I'm just gonna play a really quick video highlighting some of the new features of Google Docs that rolled out this year. All right, so if you didn't catch all of those, they've made it a lot easier to go in and tag other people in within the document. You can actually embed files and documents. You can add tasks and assign people to checklists. So a lot of stuff is just built right into Google Docs now. So I would say if you're just not sure what tool to use, your default should be Google Docs. This is really easy to do. I'm going to pause for a second and check the chat because a few different things came in. Tina, big thumbs up there for GimKit. Her students love it. So give that one a shot. Kelly also likes GimKit as well for independent work. Yes, I think Kelly made a good point that there's new like game styles that come out all the time. That definitely keeps kids interested. There's a free version and then there's a paid one at 60. Thanks, guys. All right, perfect. So that's a big thumbs up for GimKit. So as far as the collaboration, right? So all of those tools also exist with Google Slides. I would stick to those, right? So those tend to be the most widely used for collaboration. If you wanted to try Jamboard, that's another good one with collaboration. But I find that sometimes if you're collaborating on a Jamboard, keep it really like simple with not too many students in it. It's a little bit more of a free-for-all. Right. So if that's fine, then use it. But that's been one of the knocks on it is that it's a little bit harder to keep track of who did what in a Jamboard. Padlet, of course, that's still a good collaboration tool. And then Flipgrid. I don't need to go into that because everybody knows Flipgrid, but those are the go-to ones. I also put in some other links to templates that you could use. So this is a collaborative workspace template. Again, pretty simple, but just to give you an idea of how you can set these up, where if you have a collaborative station and you want to set something up like this and push it out through Google Classroom, maybe make a copy for each student. They could go through, add their name, maybe add some of the tasks they're working on, who completed what. And you could have everybody in the class work off of one master slide deck, or you could push out and have different ones for each student. It's kind of up to you how you'd want to set that up. So that's one example. Another example here, a little bit more of a specific one for ELA, but again, how to do like a collaborative plot diagram example that you can use. This is a think, pair, synthesize Google Workspace. And the way to manage it, I think, especially if it's in a live class, it seems really simple, but if you just click on the grid view, what it does is it enables you to see all your slides, right? So say, for instance, I had a class and maybe I had small groups working on different slides. This kind of gives you like a bird's eye view of everyone's slide. You can jump in and out of them, and you could actually see in real time what people are doing on each slide. So if you haven't done that as a strategy in class, it's a really easy one. You just click on that grid view button and then you're good to go. Okay, a couple other quick resources I want to share. So this one is a collaborative timeline project. So if you want to do something like that through here, if you're looking for an actual tool for collaborative timelines, there's actually a tool called Sutori. Not sure if you guys have heard of that one before. I forgot to put it in the slide deck, but I'm going to give them a shout out here. I'm actually going to make a tutorial on Sutori later on. But here is what it looks like. So again, another presentation tool where if you wanted to have students go in and make their own like interactive timeline or multimedia, or if you wanted to make one as part of a lesson, this is a good option as well. So let me add this in here. All right, thanks for joining, Tina, and good luck on your upcoming flight. Okay, so last thing is a couple other resources for Google Sheets collaboration. So I'm not going to go into this in too much depth because I know we're kind of running up on time here. But if you wanted kids to collaborate as part of a station for group projects or things like that, I did put links to templates that you could use for that. So this is a group project management template here. This is a little bit more of an advanced one, but if you wanted to use something like this to help with your stations, again, a nice way to kind of document what they're working on, they can go from there. Mrs. Keen, big Quizlet fan. Excellent. So she gave some context on the pricing. Legends of Learning. I looked into that one a little bit. So it looks like good. So there's some free and then some do cost money, but that's another up and coming game-based learning platform. Definitely worth checking out. I got to look into that one a little bit more myself. Okay, last topic, and then we're going to bring this thing home. Student creation, right? And I could do a whole session just on this part, but you may want to have a station where kids are just building and creating and designing. Here's my toolkit for that. If you want to just use Google Slides, kids can do pretty amazing work with slides. However, at this point, especially through the pandemic, kids tend to be sick of making slideshows. Teachers are sick of grading slideshows. So if you fall into that camp and you want to use something a little bit different, Google Sites is a really easy option if you want to use something like that. Adobe Spark has excellent options for visualizations for websites. Well, it's just like a one parallax scrolling website, but you can do a site there, and for video. So Adobe Spark for education, excellent versatile tool. Seesaw's got a bunch of built-in creation tools. I don't really need to go into that one. Book Creator has been one of my favorite apps for a long time. Once they became available on Chromebooks, then I liked it even more. So that's an option. And then here's the one that's really stepped up their game. It's Canva. You guys may have heard of Canva before, but they just created a new Canva for Education edition. It's basically like a free upgrade with all of the premium features are now free for teachers and kids. And if you do Canva for Education, I'll put a link in the chat there. It's a nice way for you to manage student submissions of student visualizations. You can make videos, you can make presentations, images. If you haven't given this one a shot, it may be worth having some of your kids try it out or installing it. I really do like this tool as a creation tool. It's very versatile, easy to use. Stephanie did mention too, you can have your whole district sign up. I haven't done that personally, but that sounds like the best way to do it. Just have your whole district just uploaded into the thing. And the folks at Canva really are interested in helping teachers and integrating with learning management systems. So reach out to them if you have some questions, but it does seem like a great option for folks for student creation. All right, so if you're looking for just some ideas on visible thinking routines, I love using these as a teacher. I like sharing them with folks. This is the homepage for the Project Zero visible thinking routines. I like them because they're a nice, easy way to kind of bookend a station, right? So you might have like a think, pair, share, or a see, think, wonder. It's just a nice way for kids to get their thinking out there, to document it, but also to change things up a little bit. So instead of just saying, hey, write what you learned today, it's a little bit more of a strategic way to do it based on the learning objectives or the things you're working on. So that's my last suggestion as a resource. I know it's been a lot of stuff flying at you, but if you get to look at anything today, this would be really powerful as far as your future instruction, learning some of these routines or just rediscovering them if you've used them before. All right, so that brings us to the close of our presentation. Thank you guys so much for joining. There is a session feedback form linked on that last slide. I'll put a link in the chat here too. I would super appreciate if you guys could do that. We designed these based on feedback from our first session. So if there's any other topics or things you'd like us to focus on, please let us know. Our next session coming up is on the 20th. That's going to be designed on communication strategies through Google to help families and support them, especially with everything going on. So if you guys could check that out, I'll be doing that on the 20th. All right. Thank you guys so much. I'll stand for any last questions. Otherwise, best of luck. It's a much nicer day here in New England. So hopefully you can get outside and enjoy the day. And I hope to see you again soon. Thanks, guys.